The sun was unrelenting over the North Carolina training range. Red dust spun in lazy swirls over the open ground, stinging eyes and drying throats. The place buzzed with youthful, energy-fresh recruits, lean and loud, all thinking they had something to prove. It was the kind of place where sweat, swagger, and scars built respect. And into this world stepped a woman no one expected. She didn't arrive in a Humvee or march in with crisp military cadence. She came in a dusty pickup truck, old boots stepping out onto the gravel with a soft thud. She was older than anyone else, their mid-50s at least, by the look of the crow's feet around her eyes and the streaks of grey threading her braid. Her clothes were simple: jeans, a worn flannel shirt, and a ball cap pulled low. No rank, no ribbons, no ego. To most of the recruits, she looked like someone's mum who'd wandered into the wrong place. To others, she was just a civilian trying to live out some half-baked fantasy. One of the younger men, a wiry, loud-mouthed corporal named Tennyson, nudged his buddy and snorted. "Check it out," he said. "We got Grandma trying out for Call of Duty." The other recruits laughed, some half-heartedly, others loud and mean. She said nothing, just walked to the equipment line, signed the form, and picked up her assigned M4. The rifle looked far from standard old, patched, the kind of weapon that had history. Most of the others had slick, clean models with factory settings. Hers bore scuffs, heat discoloration near the barrel, and a subtle engraving just below the trigger guard a faint serpent, almost invisible unless the light hit it right. Instructor Brooks, a tall, brawny man with a voice like thunder, barked at the group to form up. "Today," he announced, "we test for precision under wind pressure. Advanced marksmanship begins with breath, balance, and brains. Let's see if any of you can hit something besides your own pride." He glanced at the woman, and though his face didn't change, the condescension was clear. "Miss Dawson, you're quite a bit outside our typical recruit profile. Care to explain what brings you here?" She didn't flinch. "Just here to learn." More laughter behind her. Brooks gave a smirk. "You're welcome to try, but we don't grade on age." Moments later, they were all lying prone across the range. The wind picked up sharp gusts crossing the ground from left to right. The others adjusted their rifles like they'd been taught. Tight stock to shoulder, barrel straight, textbook alignment. But not her. Helen Dawson positioned herself differently. Her rifle lay low, barrel tilted at a curious angle, stock sitting beneath her shoulder blade rather than snug against it. Her breathing was slow, her grip loose but intentional. To the untrained eye, it looked wrong. "Hey fellas," Tennyson called out, not bothering to whisper. "Look at this. We got ourselves a cosplay commando. Somebody tell her the target's that way, not up in the sky." They laughed. Again. Another recruit mimicked her pose, dramatically throwing himself to the ground. "Behold the venomous grandma strike," he bellowed, wiggling his arms like a snake. "She probably learned this on YouTube." The woman never looked at them. Her focus was elsewhere on the distance, on the sway of the tall grasses, the subtle gusts rippling across the range like invisible waves. One hand made a tiny adjustment to her scope. She exhaled, then paused. From the observation deck, Lieutenant Colonel Samuel Holden watched the scene unfold. He was old-school military, decorated, discerning, and known for picking up details others missed. His eyes narrowed at the oddity of her stance. Something about the angle, the posture, the stillness. It sparked a memory, a long-buried flicker from a decade prior. But before he could place it, Helen fired. The shot cracked through the wind, crisp and decisive. "Miss." The laughter erupted like thunder. "Called it," someone crowed. "All that funky yoga and still couldn't hit squat." She said nothing, adjusted her aim again. Fired. "Miss." Brooks rolled his eyes. "We're not aiming for the clouds, Miss Dawson." But Holden leaned in closer to the spotting scope. Something about those bullet holes, they weren't random, not even close. The spacing, the placement. It was deliberate, like she was mapping wind drift. Helen fired a third time. This time, the bullet struck dead center. The laughter stopped. Dead silence swept across the line, as if the wind itself held its breath. She didn't celebrate, didn't smirk, just chambered her next round and fired 4 more times in steady rhythm. Each shot landed within a 2-inch grouping, so precise it seemed unreal. Brooks stepped forward, mouth tight. But Holden's breath caught. He had seen that shooting pattern before. In a file, stamped classified. In a report about a ghost unit that didn't officially exist. and as the wind swept the red dust across the range, he whispered to himself, "Only vipers train like that." After her final shot, Helen stood up slowly, brushing the red dust from her knees. Her movements were calm, controlled, like someone who had done this thousands of times before. The rest of the group remained silent. Their earlier bravado evaporated into the hot afternoon air. Even Tennyson, the loudest of them all, stayed frozen. His smirk had vanished. Lieutenant Colonel Holden descended from the observation platform, his eyes never leaving her. He didn't say a word as he passed the stunned recruits and walked directly to the target range. There, up close, the story was even clearer. 7 shots, all within 2 inches of each other. A pattern that wasn't just accurate, was surgical. This wasn't the work of a hobbyist or a lucky shot. It was the calling card of someone who understood ballistics like a second language. He crouched near the target and examined the grouping. His hand hovered over the last impact point just a millimeter off dead center. "This wasn't luck," he murmured. "She was calibrating." Meanwhile, Helen sat under the shade of a metal canopy, quietly cleaning her weapon. Every motion was precise, methodical, the kind of discipline that didn't come from a weekend training course. A young woman approached cautiously Corporal Jenna Chen. She was one of the only other women in the program, sharp-eyed, serious, and quietly respected. "Ma'am," Chen said softly, "I've been watching you. That shooting style, it looks familiar." Helen looked up, her face shaded by her cap. "It's something I read about once," Chen continued. "In a restricted field manual for reconnaissance sharpshooters, wind sinking, peripheral breathing, microcalibration mid-shot, but they said it was theory, too complicated to use in real time." Helen smiled faintly. "Theory's just another word for forgotten practice." "Who taught you?" Chen asked. Helen paused, then said quietly, "A team that doesn't exist anymore." Before Chen could respond, Master Sergeant Brooks stormed toward them, voice booming. "This isn't some secret ninja dojo," he snapped. "This is a military program. We follow protocols, not Hollywood tactics." Helen didn't rise. She didn't speak. "Your stance, your grip, your entire method, it's disruptive. You're confusing the others," Brooks continued. "We don't need showboating." "Sir," Chen interjected carefully, "her accuracy." "I'm not interested in circus tricks that happen to land a shot. She'll move to the back of the line, or she can leave." Helen gave a small nod, wiped down the rifle's barrel, and stood. Not a word of protest, no anger, no defense. She simply picked up her gear and walked to the far end of the firing line. But Holden had already returned to the control tent and pulled out a secure tablet. He typed furiously, searching through encrypted files, special clearance archives, and operation logs marked Do Not Index. And then he found it. A mission report dated 2013, Hill 394, Northern Afghanistan. Overwatch team, presumed lost, but the photos attached told a different story. 7 shots. Exact same spacing. Exact same technique. "Jackson," Holden called to his aide, "run a background check on that civilian trainee, Helen Dawson. I want everything." Minutes later, the young officer returned, clearly unsettled. "Sir, her file's clean. Real clean. Too clean." "How clean?" "Basic info. Volunteer civilian. No military history. No relatives in service. Medical records stop 5 years ago, then restart under a different provider in a different state. It's like she started over." Holden leaned back in his chair. He tapped the side of the tablet thoughtfully. "Then why is she shooting like someone from the Viper program?" Across the range, Helen continued her practice. Every shot she took landed with razor-sharp accuracy, and still, she didn't speak, she didn't gloat. She simply refined her craft again and again as if the world didn't exist outside the scope of her rifle. The other recruits watched in silence now. Tennyson stood near the benches, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Whatever smugness he once carried had drained away completely. Next to him, a fellow recruit whispered, "You think she's former Delta?" "No way," someone else replied. "This is something else." Rumors began to stir. Whispers of a woman who moved like a shadow, who trained in techniques no one taught anymore. One name floated from lip to lip. Viper. And Lieutenant Colonel Holden, he was making calls. Quiet, coded calls to people who didn't officially exist anymore. And every answer was the same. Viper Zero was gone. presumed dead, no known survivors. But now, there was Helen Dawson. The following morning brought a brutal wind front across the range. Crosswinds gusted violently across the 800-meter line, sending dust spiraling and bending the tall target boards like they were made of paper. Even seasoned shooters knew better than to volunteer for drills in conditions like these. But Master Sergeant Brooks had something to prove. "Voluntary demonstration?" he barked, his tone carrying challenge disguised as formality. "Who thinks they can hit a bullseye today?" Silence. Even Tennyson avoided eye contact. His earlier swagger dissolved into something quieter. No one wanted to be humiliated by the wind or, worse, outshot by the old woman. Then, from the back of the line, Helen Dawson stood. "I'll take the shot," she said. The murmurs came immediately. "You've got to be kidding. In this wind? She's crazy." Brooks raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, these are highly unstable conditions. Perhaps one of our more—" I said I'll take the shot. She stepped forward, rifle slung low, shoulders relaxed, face unreadable. As she knelt into position, something shifted not just in posture, but in the entire training ground. The jokes had stopped. The whispers too. Because now, they were watching. Every movement was deliberate, exact. Helen positioned herself the same strange way as before, stock tucked low, grip offset, muzzle tilted slightly toward the wind's curve. But this time, those who watched closely could see what she was really doing. She wasn't fighting the elements, she was joining them. One deep breath. One soft exhale. The first shot cracked like lightning across the range. Dead center. A hushed gasp swept through the crowd. Second shot same hole, barely expanding the impact. Third shot bullseye obliterated. The air was stunned. Even the wind, it seemed, had paused to watch. Then, from the side, Lieutenant Colonel Holden strode forward, voice raised for all to hear. "Stop laughing," he said. "You're witnessing textbook Viper mechanics." Heads turned. Even Brooks blinked in confusion. Holden continued, "There are only 6 people on Earth trained to shoot like that, and according to every official record, none of them are still alive." No one moved. Tennyson looked pale. Brooks muttered under his breath, "That's impossible." "Officially, yes," Holden replied, "but muscle memory doesn't follow official timelines." He approached Helen, standing just behind her as she rose from the firing line. "What's your real name?" he asked softly. She turned to him, voice even. That name was buried in a casualty report a long time ago. This one, she touched the patch on her chest, this one's just for surviving. Holden didn't press further. He didn't need to, because now the memories were aligning. Afghanistan, Hill 394, the mission that went off the rails. His unit had been surrounded Taliban fighters closing in from 3 flanks. And then, without warning, 3 shots had torn through a sandstorm. 3 perfect hits, 1 life saved, his. Holden reached into his pocket. He pulled out a tarnished brass casing, the end slightly marked, with a notch, something he'd carried for 12 years. "I kept this," he said. "It was the only proof I had that someone had our backs that day." Helen looked at the casing. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes, those quiet, haunted eyes, held the weight of years that couldn't be spoken. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said gently, but everyone watching knew she did. Suddenly, a young soldier's voice cut in from behind. "I recorded that. I got the whole thing." The soldier Private Lee held up his phone. On screen, the impossible shots, the colonel's words, Helen's quiet defiance. It was already uploading. Within hours, the footage swept through the military's internal networks like wildfire. Veterans began commenting. Names, stories, locations. "I saw that grouping in Syria, 2014. She pulled us out of a mess in Nigeria. Thought she was a myth. Viper 0. Never saw her face. But the shots? You never forget." By sunset, the recruits weren't looking at Helen like a civilian anymore. They were looking at her like a relic from something bigger than they understood. Something legendary. Brooks tried to reassert control. "All right, that's enough fairy tales for today. Back to the rotation." But even his voice had lost its edge. Corporal Chen stepped forward instead. "With respect, Master Sergeant, we should be learning from her, not ignoring her." Brooks hesitated. Then, for once, he said nothing. Helen picked up her rifle, gave a slight nod, and began walking off the range. But before she could leave, Holden caught up to her. "You don't have to vanish again," he said. "They need you." She paused, turned slightly, and replied, "I didn't come here to be seen. I came to remember who I was, before they made me forget." Then she disappeared into the wind, leaving behind only the hollow echo of brass falling on Graveland, a group of young soldiers who had just witnessed what true excellence looks like. Not loud, not proud, just precise. 3 days later, just before dawn, the range stood quiet. No gunfire, no drills, just wind whispering across the empty desert. At the far edge of the training grounds, a single table had been placed, draped in black cloth, flanked by 2 flags. On it sat a worn rifle case and a small metal placard that read, "Viper Zero Never Forgotten." The recruits stood at attention, not because someone ordered them to, but because it felt right. Veterans had driven from across the state, their presence quiet but firm, some in faded fatigues, others in plain clothes. But all of them moved the same way, back straight, eyes steady, like people who knew what war actually cost. Master Sergeant Brooks stood before the group, his voice steadier than usual. "I've been training soldiers for 15 years, he began. "Thought I'd seen every kind of shooter walk through these gates." He looked toward the rifle case. "But last week, I was reminded that greatness doesn't always show up how we expect. Sometimes, it wears worn boots, carries a dusty rifle, and walks in like it doesn't belong, until it proves that it always did." He stepped aside. One by one, the recruits came forward. Each left something on the table, a patch, a shell casing, a photograph. Even Tennyson, the brash recruit from day one, approached quietly. He placed his marksmanship badge next to the rifle case. "I don't understand everything that happened," he said aloud, "but I know I judged someone for what I thought I saw. I was wrong." At the end, Lieutenant Colonel Holden stepped forward. He opened the rifle case slowly, revealing Helen's modified M4. "The military teaches us about courage, honor, and sacrifice," he said. "But sometimes we forget the ones who lived those values when no one was watching." He paused, scanning the faces before him. She didn't ask for recognition. She didn't need medals. She just wanted to remind us what precision, silence, and service really look like. He closed the case. "This rifle will be displayed in the Special Operations Museum not as a trophy, but as a reminder that not every hero wears a uniform. Some just get the job done." The ceremony ended with 3 rifle volleys. But as the last echo faded into the distance, something strange happened. From beyond the far ridge where no personnel were stationed, where no sound should have come there, was a single shot. Sharp, precise. A final salute from somewhere deep in the wilderness. And then silence again. Later that week, the footage of the Shotand, the woman behind it, was uploaded to veteran forums and shared through closed networks. It spread like wildfire. The world didn't know her name, but those who had been there they remembered, and they understood. "She saved my unit in Kandahar. We called her Phantom 1, never saw her, only heard her rifle. She's the reason my son came home." Comments like these painted a new kind of legacy that didn't need news headlines or medals. Instead, it lived in stories whispered across generations. Weeks passed, and something changed at the training facility. The instructors didn't just teach breathing techniques or weapon stances anymore. They taught observation, respect, the kind that comes from understanding that true skill can look like anything or anyone. At the front gate, the memorial was relocated. Not buried in some corner, but right where every new recruit would see it the moment they arrived. On the wall beside it, a new inscription: "Excellence requires no audience. Heroes need no applause." 6 months after that legendary week, Lieutenant Colonel Holden walked the range one quiet evening. The sun was setting low, casting amber shadows across the field. He stopped at the original firing position where it all began. Someone was already there. Private Martinez, a recent graduate, stood in the prone position, carefully mimicking the same stance Helen had used. Holden approached. "Any luck?" Martinez looked up, sweat on his brow. "Closer each time, sir. The math's the hard part." "Why practice that technique?" Martinez straightened. "My brother was pinned down in Somalia last year. Enemy fire had them trapped. Someone provided overwatch from a spot no one even thought reachable." He paused. "When I saw the footage, I recognized the grouping." Holden nodded. "You think it was her?" "I think there are more like her," Martinez said. People who protect soldiers they'll never meet. Footsteps approached from behind. A woman in instructor fatigue stepped into view, someone new, yet familiar. She examined Martinez's stance. Good alignment, but you're fighting the wind. Sync with it. Holden turned. You're new here. She extended a hand. Staff Sergeant Thompson, transferred from an assignment that doesn't exist anymore. Holden froze. A small scar on her left hand, a familiar cadence, and when she adjusted Martinez's rifle, he caught a glimpse of something small on her wrist. A serpent. Not printed, inked. It wasn't Helen, but it was someone like her. The legacy hadn't ended, it had evolved. And in that quiet moment, Holden realized something profound. Helen Dawson had never returned to be recognized. She came back to pass the torch. Not in words, not in ceremony, but in action. And that was all that ever mattered. Greatness doesn't always announce itself with medals or noise. Sometimes it walks in quietly, does the impossible, and leaves without a name. Helen Dawson reminded us all that dignity doesn't need to shout, and that true service often happens in silence without expectation of applause. So the next time you see someone overlooked, someone underestimated, ask yourself, what history might they be carrying that you'll never see on the surface? Have you ever witnessed a quiet act of courage, a moment where dignity triumphed without a single word? Share your memory in the comments. We're building a map of silent victories. And tell us, what kind of story would you like to see next? A forgotten veteran? A janitor with a past? Or someone you'd never expect to be the hero of their own story? Let us know below. Your voice helps keep these stories alive. Because here, silence never wins, but valor always endures.